Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Rotman School of Management. My name is Brett Hendry, Director of Strategic Events. We are so excited that you could all be here today for this very special event. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge, as we always do here at the university, the land on which the school operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work and meet on this land. So here in Canada, there's been a steep decline in the number of people engaged with entrepreneurship. The BDC recently found that the country has 100,000 fewer entrepreneurs than it did 20 years ago. And so here at the Rotman School, we're really trying to cultivate a next generation of business leaders. And so it's essential that we study and understand the great entrepreneurs of modern times here in Canada and around the world. And so we're excited to do that today with a very special book launch event, this great new book by Professor Dimitry Anastakis, Dream Car, Malcolm Bricklin, the Fantastic SV1, and the End of Industrial Modernity. You'll learn a lot about Malcolm and his story today, and we've got a terrific panel, and of course our esteemed guest is Malcolm himself. He's been called an automotive visionary, and for over half a century he's been innovating and leading in the automotive space. He founded Subaru of America, and of course his great achievement with the SV1. You'll hear more about that today, and also his more current projects in the world of electric vehicles and alternative energy. As I mentioned, the author of this terrific new book is Professor Dimitry Anastakis. He is the L.R. Wilson and R.J. Curry Chair in Canadian Business History here at U of T in the Department of History and the Rotman School. This is Dimitri's 9th book, and he's also chair of the Canadian Business History Association. We're very fortunate to have moderating the conversation today Jill McIntosh. Jill is a highly sought after contributor to a variety of publications, including driving.ca, autotrader.ca, Old Autos, and Automotive News Canada. She's a member of the Automotive Journalists Association of Canada, and her new vehicle reviews, consumer advice, and auto history features can be found on her website, womanonwheels.ca. A few housekeeping notes before we get into the conversation. The panel will have a conversation, but at about 1:45, we'll take audience questions. So please think about your questions in advance, and we'll have roving mics going around. And a reminder to please silence your phones. And with that, please give a warm welcome to all of our guests today.
Well, thank you so much for everyone that's here, and to Dimitri and to Malcolm Bricklin. And Dimitri, I'm going to start with you. The Bricklin, it's a well-known story for auto enthusiasts, but the car was built back in 1974 and 1975, and others may not be that familiar with it. Now, can you give us a recap of the car and what led you to see it as an important hinge in automotive and political history?
Sure, thank you very much, Jill, and thanks to everyone for being here. It's great to be able to talk about this and not feel guilty about going on and on about this car, which I do all the time. But it's just to give you a kind of Coles Notes version, a synopsis. So in the late 1960s, a young entrepreneur by the name of Malcolm Bricklin had some success in bringing Subaru to North America. He was the first guy to bring Japanese cars into the North American market. And he decided that he wanted to build a sexy, sporty, safety vehicle that would compete with Corvette, and it would get into the baby boom car market, which was booming at the time. And he had this vision of building a car, and he built a prototype. And eventually he came to New Brunswick to convince the people of New Brunswick, the premier at the time, to support the manufacture of that vehicle. And it's an amazing thing because between the 1940s and Elon Musk's Roadster, there was only one car that made it into production in North America the whole time. Everybody thinks about the DeLorean. The DeLorean was built in Northern Ireland. And this gentleman did it in about 50 years ago. For 2 years, cars were built in New Brunswick. They built about 3,000 of them. They made it into production before he went bankrupt, unfortunately. But in that story, there's all kinds of valuable lessons about entrepreneurship, about the auto industry, about the changing dynamics of North American society. So that's what drew it to me. It's not just a Canadian story about a car built in New Brunswick, but I used the car to talk about all kinds of broader ideas around what was going on in North America. Because in the early 1970s, there's this breakpoint. You've got the OPEC oil embargo, you've got all these changing dynamics, and the car appears just at that moment and is a perfect vehicle, to use the pun, to talk about all these different issues. So I hope that's a useful synopsis of the car and the story.
Thank you. Now, Malcolm, people think it's very easy to create an auto company. Whether it was Henry Ford at the turn of the century or Elon Musk turning Tesla into a major force today, you were and you still are a visionary with a long history in the auto industry. And tell me, what makes it so difficult to succeed?
Well, the difficulty is getting enough money to do it right, which is what Musk did very well. He raised $20 billion and took him 10 years, and he has done an incredible job, but he has gotten into every single thing that he is now in control of, which I happen to think is going to be an Achilles heel. Because as technology changes, if you're stuck with even something good but it's not great, you don't want to get rid of it to go do the new thing. So we'll see. If anybody can do it, it'll be him. But I didn't get in the auto industry that way. Starting from Subaru, I have no ability to deal with cars. I can still pick up a hood and not know what the hell is underneath. I am, as far as I'm concerned, the smartest, most experienced person in how you take a vehicle and introduce it to the United States with a dealer network and with something about it that makes the public want to buy without having to spend a fortune in advertising, and do it with a very little amount of money. Less money to build these cars I spent than you open a dealership for a dealership car. So how did that happen? Well, let me go back. I didn't get in the automobile business because I wanted to get in the automobile business. I don't think I bought a car up until then. I went out and leased a car. And when I was ready to get rid of it, I gave it back and I leased another car. That's how much I knew about the car business. What I did do, and I won't get into the long story, was got asked by Innocente Corporation in Italy to get rid of 25,000 Lambrettas that they had sitting in Long Island. Because at that time, the Lambretta scooters, which were very attractive along with Vespas, had gone out of favor because mopeds came in, and they were embarrassed. It happened to be we were doing other kinds of business, and they called me to come over and see them because I was an American. That was my basic qualification. They knew me and I was American. And what I sell them for them? I had to explain my mom wouldn't let me have a scooter. And I knew nothing about the scooter business, and I wouldn't know what to do. But they insisted. They had to get rid of it. They had to get rid of them because it was an embarrassment to the company. The money meant nothing. So after pushing me, in order to get them to say no, I said, okay, give me a year contract, $5,000 a month, and an office in New York. And they said, okay. Now I was stuck. I had no idea what to do. So what did I do? I went out and bought a used Rolls Royce for $4,000, hired a chauffeur, and every morning I came downstairs in my pajamas and my pillow and got in the back seat, and up the turnpike we went till the last exit, where I changed into my suit and went to the Time and Life building where they had an office and an Italian secretary waiting for me. Now what am I going to do? I have no idea what I'm going to do. So I bought the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and I read papers until 12 o'clock. Now I had to find a place to go to lunch. Did I want to go to 21? Do I want to go to Toots Shores? Those are my big decisions for the day. I chose Toots Shores. In those days, Toots Shores had a round table in their thing, and you were known, if you sat at the round table, you are going to talk to people at the table. So people like the chairman of General Motors would sit at that table to get real information, is what they thought. I sat next to a guy that was a furniture representative for a North Carolina furniture store. His office was across the street from Time and Life building, and his customer was JCPenney's, which was next door to the building. So now every day I went to go have lunch, and he sat next to me. But this man was a police groupie. What's a police groupie? That's a guy who has a badge, loves talking about police, knows everybody on the police force. It's in his blood. He just likes it. And he would talk about that, and for a day or two that was interesting. But afterwards it got a little bit, until about 2 weeks of me going to lunch every day, reading the paper every day, driving home with the rolls every day, trying to figure out, I wonder what the hell I'm supposed to do. He says to me, give me 3 of the scooters. I said, sure, what for? Now, by the way, we're talking about things that cost $400, $500, $600 in those days. So there wasn't a lot of money that we're really talking about. There was something about it that it was embarrassing for him. He said, I want to give it to the police force. I talked him into trying it out for the meter maids. Okay, gave him 3 scooters. A week later, he says, I have a report here that says 1 scooter is the same as 5 meter maids. They want to buy 1,000. So we negotiated 5%. I called up Italy. I said, I sold 1,000 vehicles. I have to give the guy 5%. No problem. Boom. They got it by 1,000. Very happy with it. Things are going on another week or two. At that time, Central Park had a problem. You didn't go in Central Park, day or night. Not killings, but robberies. It was a cesspool. Remember, we're talking about 1967. He comes back, he says, I need 3 more scooters. Why? I told him they got to try that for Central Park. Now the truth, what they're going to do is run after people up and down the hills. A moped would really be better. A little wheel is not smart to go running over those kinds of, but they didn't know. Nobody went to him. This guy went to him. So they heard the story about what happened with the meter maids. They take 3. 2 weeks later, another 1,000 scooters. And all over the New York Times and all the papers there, the Central Park is open from the scooter patrol. And it was. Daytime, people were all over having lunch, doing everything. It was really safe. It really worked. I'm going, great.
But is this how you got into the automotive?
Let's see where this leads to.
Okay.
Okay. So now, the next thing he says to me is, I need $15,000. What do you need $15,000 for? I'm going to put an ad in the Police Gazette. The 2 people who are in charge of the 2 different divisions will willingly put their name in there and their phone number for any police force to call them, and they'll tell them what happened in New York. Guess what? We sold out all the scooters. Now I got 10 months to go, and I'm still getting paid. Now I really have nothing to do. So I'm trying to figure, okay, what am I going to do? I can't just do nothing. So I read the papers, and I read an ad about a company in Boston that has 450 scooters called Rabbit on rental. And he needs $75,000. I'm looking, and I look at rental, and I see people are getting $15 an hour. That means in 30 days, they can have it all paid for. And then I see they go out of business in a couple months. And I find out their problem is when you're getting on a scooter and you're renting it, it's because you've never been on a scooter to pay that kind of money. And now you have to change gears and ride on something, and what happens? You get in accidents. And what do? They close up shop because they don't got insurance. So I went to Farmers and got insurance, $1 an hour. So now I had insurance, but I had no scooters. Loretta was out of the scooter business. They sold their factory to India. So I went to see the guy in Boston. And he said, here's my problem. 450 scooters makes a lot of money in the summertime, but I got a storm in the winter. And I have a whole bunch of scooters that I bought because I'm the distributor for the United States, and it's costing me money. He had a small airplane because he loved flying airplanes. Everything was costing him money, and he had no income. And he didn't want to really sell anything. He just wanted to rent things.
So did you end up selling them all?
Well, let's just see. We're almost getting to where you want to hear.
Here.
It's almost there. And this is a story that took me to places I never could imagine. So far, I am in the scooter business. And so he tells me he got an SBA loan, and the Boston, I think it was Merchant Bank, was the one who guaranteed it, and he owes them $75,000. He takes me in the office to meet the guy, and they tell me it's overdue. I said, do you have a contract? Yeah. They show me the contract. I said, you get that contract assigned to me, and I'll guarantee the loan for 90 days. At the end of 90 days, if it's not paid off by the company, I'll pay it off personally. Okay. A week later, I get a call, contract signed. Now, unfortunately, I have a habit of just believing everybody, and I really don't want to get into the details. You keep the contract in the bank. Okay, great. I buy a telex, and I telex them. Oh, well, you know, now I have all these, about 200 real new scooters in a warehouse, and I make up a thing to sell a dozen scooters to gas stations. A lot of people owned their gas stations back then, and you could fund it with a mortgage on your gas station, and you had gas and service. You didn't figure it cost anything because you got it there, and I had insurance. Boom, I sell out the 200. Now I want everything they can build. I send them a thing. Tell me how many you can build. I'll give you a letter of credit for all of them. I'm coming over to see you. And they send me a telex. Who am I? And don't I know they sold the factory and dismantling it to Israel? Huh? I called the bank. Oh yeah, we knew that. We forged the contract. We figured you'd be able to take care of it. I'm cocky, no problem. I telex back, I'm coming to see you. Now I go to Japan. It's 1967. I'm wearing Peter Max ties, double-breasted suits, sideburns down to here. I'm 68 years old, and everybody I meet is 50 and older, and they're wearing gray and gray.
But is this how you got into Subaru?
This is how I met Fuji Heavy Industries, trying to convince them to unsell the goddamn factory to Israel. And so they were worried they have a liability, and they were scared of the United States. So they took me everywhere, and they showed me everything they built in cars and everything. I wanted those scooters. They were automatic transmission. They were perfect. I thought I talked them into it. I go home really happy, and I get a thing 2 weeks later, sorry, we can't cancel the contract. So I fly back there because they told me that little car cost $640, FOB Yokohama.
That was the 360, correct?
That's the 360. I know nothing about the car, but I could sell a car that cost me that kind of money.
Well, let me ask Dimitri something here. Could I just interrupt for a second?
You can. The story's not over.
We'll get back to it.
Okay.
Dimitri, I'd like to ask you to follow up. You, in your book, you said that the Bricklin factory closure represented a telling example in the developing narrative of North American deindustrialization and a move towards a newer, leaner manufacturing condition. Can you expand on that, and if Bricklin directly influenced any of that?
Sure. And first I'll say, what Mr. Bricklin has just explained for the last 5 or 6 minutes, I do cover in the book, but it's only like 3 sentences.
You don't tell it as well.
And there are pictures. There are pictures as well. But the reason I talk about the firm as being a great example of deindustrialization is because it shows up, it's there for about 2.5 years in St. John and Minnow in New Brunswick, and it closes pretty rapidly. So it's almost like a microcosm of a broader phenomenon that's going on in North America in the 1970s and 1980s, where you got all these factories that are being built and suddenly closing down because of offshore competition or new production techniques, especially with Japanese firms who are using the Toyota production system to really accelerate and make car production even more efficient. And that happens pretty dramatically in the 1970s. And the Bricklin car and the Bricklin factory is a really great kind of truncated version of a broader process of deindustrialization that goes on and continues and occurs. What was the second part of?
Did Bricklin directly influence any of that?
So it's a really good question. Now, Malcolm, because of the way he built his cars, he couldn't build cars traditionally. He couldn't build engines. He couldn't make the car all the way through the entire production process. So he did a kind of a hybrid version where he just got parts from all the car companies, including the engines, and he kind of bolted them together, and he made a version of the car that was really a slimmed down version, which is in fact exactly what Tesla did at the beginning of their production processes. They used a Lotus platform, they got their batteries from Panasonic, I think, and they kind of put it all together in a really hybridized version of lean production. And Bricklin is doing this because he has no choice in the early 1970s. By the time you get to the 1980s, the 1990s, and today, that's normal in the car industry, where you get your battery kind of shipped in, put it into the vehicle, and lots of your sub-assemblies are coming from all over the place. In the old days, up until the 1970s, the car manufacturers built almost all of the parts that they used, and they owned all of the companies that they used to build those parts with. This is a new version, and he does it only because he has no choice. He doesn't have enough money. He doesn't have the ability to do it, but it becomes a precursor to how cars get built starting in the 1990s.
The only problem with all that is you didn't find the motive of why I built the car. And now that's the rest of the story.
Or they could read the book, too.
Well, actually, it's the part you didn't put in there. It's the part that
sell some
says,
books here, man. Trying to sell some books.
it's the part that says, I decided now that I was there, I wanted the 360. And they were still trying to humor me. So they said, give us $1.5 million because next year we have to meet federal regulations. I wasn't about to give them $1.5 million. I didn't know what I was doing. So I flew back and I went to Washington and I went to NHTSA and I asked for the book. And after 3 pages, my eyes glazed over. I had no idea what I had to do, except the first page said, I could bring these cars in if they're under 1,000 pounds. And my brochure said, yes, under 1,000 pounds. So I went inside and said, now what do I do? They said, you go to IRS, they'll give you an exemption. How quick can you change the law? He said, when people complain, we have to have hearings, and then 2 years. Where do I go? And they told me, and I got a letter, and I put it in my pocket. I hired a 50-year-old guy, so I had some age, and off to Japan I went to, I can get the government to give me an exemption, and if I do, you give me the car. They said, okay, and Subaru of America was started.
And that's the company that is still around. The company you started is the Subaru of America that still exists today.
That's the one today, and that's only still part of the story to get to the car. Things are going great.
Let me ask you this then, because we are talking about the automakers and you know how they do things. Tell me, and I'm going to ask Dimitri this as well. What is the industry? What is the auto industry doing wrong today? Not your company that you had or that you have.
Are you talking to me? Or
yes, no, I'm talking to you, sorry. Not the company you have right now or the one that you had, but the auto industry today. What are they doing wrong? What are they doing?
They jumped into EVs too fast. That's what they're doing wrong.
Why do you say that?
They invested a fortune and they invested their reputation on a car that does not have enough charging. I'm in it too, but I did something different. They went into it before they had enough charging and enough electricity, and they said to the world, you need the car. Nobody needs that car. A combustion car does the full job. We built a car that we're doing right now that you don't need, but you want.
You want.
That's a different game altogether. You didn't need the Bricklin, you wanted it. And that's what we do that's different than them.
Well, let me ask Dimitri, what do you see as the auto industry doing wrong today?
I don't see them doing things wrong. I see the difficulties of doing what they're doing. I call it the greatest format upgrade in the history of the universe, because we're moving from a situation where we're trying to decarbonize the auto fleet. We're trying to do this, and it is really a 20 to 30 year project, and it may be EVs, it may be plug-in hybrid, it may be hydrogen, it may be a different set of propulsion systems that we don't know. And the problem for the car companies is it's really hard to run a marathon while you're doing surgery on yourself at the same time, which is effectively what they're doing in trying to make this transition from an internal combustion engine to EVs at the same time. Ford had to split itself into 2 companies. General Motors is having real difficulties. It's different to be a startup like a Tesla, where you can start with a blank slate. And you know, Musk has done an amazing thing, and I do talk about Musk in the book because it's a game-changing situation here. But it is just so difficult to do this at scale, to do it safely, to do it economically, and to do it profitably. And this is what eventually killed the Bricklin. He was in production. He was up to making cars. They were going to be into production on a pretty regular basis, but they just were not making enough money at time fast enough. And I think, I don't think they're doing anything wrong. I think they're trying to do as many things right as they can. That may be the problem.
Well, let me ask another question.
Excuse me 1 second. Mm-hmm. I'm going to disagree with him about that, and if you don't mind, I'd really like to get into it. We had 46,000 back orders on that car. The car was getting really good. The Premier decided to use the car to win an election. And he won with the most popularity ever in any election, and it was called, he won the Bricklin election. I thought that was fabulous. 3 months later, he came in the door and said, I'm closing it down. We had no problem. We had the sales, we had 400 dealers, we had the people. Closing us down, why? He said, because now every single day I go downstairs to talk to the press, and what do they say? How's Malcolm and how's the car? I have no more political standing. I'm going to close you down, I'm going to wait a year, I'm going to get abused, I'm going to call another election, and it's going to be my election. And that's exactly what he did.
So Malcolm says it was a political decision, and it was. And the reason it was a political decision is because New Brunswick had already put in $25 million into the venture, and it needed more money. It needed more and more and more money. And they kept coming to him. And at one point, Malcolm says to the Premier, even General Motors has to get more money to finance what they're doing. Eventually, we'll make some money.
That's true, by the way.
So long to make money in the auto industry. Yesterday, I think it was Rivian announced a $700 million loss on $150 million in revenues. Fisker just put his house up for sale. It's very hard to make money in the car industry, which is why by the 1960s, there's only 3 companies in North America that can actually do it.
Yep. Well, let me ask both of you, and I'll start with you, Dimitri. We know what they're doing wrong. What are the automakers right now doing right?
They're trying. They're trying pretty hard. And you know, the range of vehicles that people are getting access to, if you go to a car dealership now, you have options. You can, if you want to buy an EV, the range of vehicles that are being offered is more and more and more. There's a good mix in terms of what the fleet is there. They are doing the right thing in the sense that, you know, we have an existential issue going on here where we need to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from transportation. And this will go a significant way of doing this, but it's going to take time and it's going to be complicated in doing it. And many people are unsatisfied by the options that they have.
Well, let me ask you, Malcolm, what do you see the auto industry doing right?
I know what I'm going to do my part to make it right. I have come over a technology of a way to use hydrogen that's never been heard for before. And I will be able to have everybody go to the pump at every gas station and pump something into their tank that is not hydrogen, that turns into hydrogen right before it goes in the engine. And it will revolutionize the industry, and I will give it away because I'm going to be making so much money every time a gallon is pumped.
Well, let me ask you this then, Malcolm. Are there any automakers doing anything today that was influenced by what you did with the Bricklin, whether it's its manufacturing, its styling, the sales model?
They have manufacturing down pat. They know what they're doing. All of them know what they're doing with manufacturing.
But did they get that from you?
What?
Did they get any of that from you?
No, they don't need any information on how to build a car.
No, I mean with the original Bricklin that you built in New Brunswick.
Yep.
Did that have any influence on?
Well, interestingly enough, while I was building it, I was invited to General Motors to meet with the guy who was the head of design. And he showed me all around the great technology. It was absolutely amazing. And he said, by the way, we're building a Camaro because we're influenced by your car.
Really?
And that Camaro supposedly was supposed to be what their copy was. But they didn't need my design. Believe me, they can design gorgeous cars. It's the people who make the decision that aren't so damn good. They're too conservative. They're too worried about doing what they did yesterday instead of figuring out what you need tomorrow.
Now, we've been talking about Tesla, and of course, he's the man of the hour these days. Now, Malcolm, I get the impression that I get from Musk is that he thinks up these ideas, an inexpensive EV, the Cybertruck, the tunnel, the spaceship, and then his mind immediately goes to the next thing, and his engineers have to pick up the pieces and make it work. Now, is that accurate, and how do you see his company long term?
Okay. Well, first of all, once upon a time, about 2008, I got a call from a guy by the name of Eberhard, and he told me about his partner, Mr. Musk, and he wanted to know when I came to California, would I meet with him? And I did. And one of my sons filmed the 4-hour meeting, at which time I pushed, you need dealers. And he told me, screw it, I'm not getting dealers, I'm selling it on the internet. And I said, I'm not sure you can, but if you can't service it on the internet. And it's really important that you have dealers to service it. I'm going to have a team that does it. I said a team internally is interested in saving money. A dealer network is interested in doing it right because they make money at it. It's a difference, and it'll be your kill. And I thought he was stubborn, and man, when he started doing what he's doing, my hat went off to him. That man is a genius. He is a human being that we haven't seen very often, and I personally think he's got a bunch of Achilles heels because he has too much invested in really good batteries, but they're batteries, and that's not where it's going to be going. And it's hard to get rid of billions of dollars, no matter how good the next step is. Now, if there's anybody who can do it, I'd bank on him, but it's going to be a problem.
Dimitri, how do you see Tesla long term? Do you see the business model there?
I see Tesla as being an amazing first mover. He's a lot like Henry Ford, including all the problems in terms of some of his characteristics. And he certainly is a visionary. I mean, what he's done is proven that mass manufacturing of these can be done, and it can be done profitably. The longer term issue with the company is, can he save it when it runs into trouble? Because at some point, and it's already happening now, Tesla's going to go into a little bit of a downspin. It'll go down. I mean, they've had over 50% of the market share in EVs for the last 10 years. At some point, that's not going to happen, and it won't be enough to cut costs. It won't be enough to cut prices. He'll be in trouble. Whether or not he can keep the company going, save the company, keep it independent is a big question. And I'm not totally sold as to his ability. Great at starting a company, an amazing visionary. Certainly he's been able to manage the production of stuff, but whether or not he's actually able to get it out of the ditch, if it goes into a ditch, is a completely different question. And I've always said that, you know, when Tesla was really hitting its heights, that this was complete irrational exuberance because it's just, the price was too crazy. It's kind of calmed down a little bit. We'll see. I still see a lot more consolidation in the industry going forward. The kind of thing that's happened with Stellantis, where Chrysler joined Fiat and PSA. I could see Tesla at some point maybe connecting with somebody else.
Now, Malcolm, to follow up on that, you've said that that automakers are getting into EVs, and that's not such a good idea. But you right now are working, your visionary vehicles is working on the Bricklin 3 EV, a three-wheeled electric car. What made you want to create that?
Well, I saw that clean is going to be important. And at that time, I had played with hydrogen, and I couldn't figure it out because hydrogen goes boom.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's like 117,000 car fires, and nobody gives a damn. One boom with hydrogen car, and it's the Hindenburg. So I stayed away, far away. I also have a guy on the board who happens to be a 4-star admiral and vice chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff at one time, and he was in charge of the nuclear submarines, and they had to make from water hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is what they breathed on submarines, but the hydrogen they had to get rid of. And on 2 submarines he was on, it blew up. And he said, stay away from it. And I stayed away from it until I found something that uses it and stays away from it. It's not important now because we've got too many other things to talk about. The point of the story is I knew I can sell what I'm doing because I did not ignore the fact that all the stuff that is what I made. So I made it a policy. Anybody wants to buy a car, you got to have a garage. And in that garage, you have to have 220. And if you don't have it, don't buy the car. You'll hate it because you're going to have to go to a charger. And if there was 1 million charging stations, what are you going to do? I had a call when I first built the prototype. I didn't have the 220, so I couldn't charge it there. I go to a charger. I had to call my wife to pick me up. What a wonderful way to own a car. And then go back and pick it up. Oh man, 3 days I hated that. I was ready to kill it. Until I said, to hell with it, and I put a 220 in, and now every time I go to the garage, I don't care if I went 5 miles, I plug it in. I got no problem.
But the car that you're building, the 3 EV, it's a 3-wheeled vehicle, correct? Sorry?
Why is it a 3-wheel?
No, not why is it a 3-wheel. Is it a low speed vehicle, or is it going to be like
No.
No.
It's,
tell me a little bit about
0 to 60 in 4 seconds, 350 miles between charges. It does not lean. It's like you're on a railroad track. The reason I made it a 3-wheel, because I say 1,500 pounds, I use half the batteries to get the same performance. And therefore, I can sell it for $39,000.
Wow.
And pay a dealer and pay a distributor a good commission and make a lot of money.
Now let me go back to the Bricklin that there's two of them sitting outside that,
Yeah.
that Dimitri wrote about. In hindsight, what would you have done differently with that car? Would you have tried it at all, and what could have made it work?
If I could have had any actual meaningful thing, I would tell the premier not to use the damn car to win the election. That's the only thing we did wrong. We would have gotten the money. We spent $30 million and 2 years from the day I said I'm going to build the car. John DeLorean, who was going to be my president at one time, and who used our car to build his car with my permission. I really liked the man. I sent him to Ireland because they had come to me. I said, they kill people there, I'm not going. I said, they'll give you whatever you want. He spent 5 years and $300 million. His problem was after 5,000 cars, he couldn't sell anymore. I told him in the beginning, there's a rule about marketing. No matter how great your thing is, you can't have the same thing. If you don't change it, you're going to end up losing sales. It becomes too common. And you can't make a stainless steel painted because if you anodize it, it's dull. And you need shiny. And that's what happened.
Yeah,
And-
DeLorean only made 9,000 vehicles in Northern Ireland, and it costs about $300 million. Bricklin makes 3,000 with about $30 million. It's kind of amazing. And it is true that DeLorean was in many ways inspired by Bricklin, the gull wing doors, where he builds it, the fact that it doesn't have any paint. It's all stainless steel because it's really, really hard to paint cars. There's no paint shop in Northern Ireland. There was no paint shop for Bricklin. One of the genius things that he does is he uses plastic so he doesn't have to paint his cars, which is another example of today. A lot of cars have plastic cladding on them, which Bricklin had done 30, 40 years before Saturn made plastic like an idea. So it's kind of a miracle that he's able to do what he does on such a tight budget and in New Brunswick of all places.
Now, I mean, if they had picked your car for the Back to the Future movie, we probably there wouldn't be people out there looking at the two out there and saying, you know, what are those? They'd be saying, wow, that's the car from the movie. Did you think he was going to succeed?
So John?
John DeLorean.
Again, I thought if anybody was, it was going to be him. He knew manufacturing. He didn't know marketing. And he'd never been an entrepreneur. And he tried to play an entrepreneur by reading books, and he didn't turn into an entrepreneur. I mean, he took $12 million and put it in Switzerland and told everybody about it. I mean, I don't know what kind of books he was reading, but that's not the way you do the game, all right? The point is, he tried to do something because he didn't like General Motors, because they didn't like him, because he was a showman.
He was a showman.
And they don't like showmen. They want you to be vanilla. So they put him in a position that was a higher position, but he had no real say. And he couldn't stand it. He called me and he said, I'll work for you and I'll be your president. Give me $1.6 million. And I took him to the bank, and the bank was going to give it to me on my Subaru stock. And then he called me back after we had agreed everything and told me, my lawyer said it should be after taxes. And I thought for a second, it was on the phone. Just another couple $100,000. And I really want him, because I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with manufacturing. And then I said, you know what, we're both narcissists. He's going to want his name on the back of the car. That's not going to happen. So I told him that. I said, let's slow down and let's think about it. And we thought about it and we didn't do it. But he called me when he was going to build the car, when I was no longer in the car business. And I sent him down the road, and I thought he was going to get it done. I really did. Stainless steel was the same reason I did acrylic, because you can't afford $300 million for a paint factory.
Right.
Now it's $800 million. That's what we were both getting rid of. That's the reason for it. And God bless him. I really hoped he did.
Yeah, well, I mean, for people who aren't familiar with him, I mean, you remember the DeLorean from the Back to the Future movie, but it was produced by John DeLorean, who had worked for General Motors and most famously created the GTO, which he did when they told him that he couldn't have a vehicle with that much horsepower. And so what he did was he made it an option that very quietly told the dealers that if you want to order this, you know, this is how you get all the extra horsepower in this vehicle. And of course, so many people wanted it and bought it that GM made it into the GTO, and it became a huge sales success. And this was a man who understood cars. Now you understand entrepreneur, and was that his problem? You would have made a good team.
Yeah,
why
absolutely.
didn't you team up with him then?
Because I didn't want to have his name on the back of the car.
Sorry, in 1978, the Detroit News calls DeLorean and Bricklin the Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid of the automotive industry, because they have all these similarities. They're big personalities. They both have these cars. They both have issues with their cars as well, but they're both very creative individuals in terms of what they're doing. So it's an interesting dynamic. And not to plug the book, but there are some references to the DeLorean in the book, because there's so many parallels, and they do work together. And as Mr. Bricklin says, at one point he tries to hire DeLorean and does hire DeLorean, and it doesn't end up working out.
That would have been quite a team. Other than the fact of, well, you could have called it the Bricklin DeLorean, or the DeLorean Bricklin.
I wasn't willing. We never really got into the discussion. That was behind my mind.
Okay.
And the truth of the matter is, I'm a believer in everything in my life happens for a good reason. So let's see what could have happened. Because I honestly believe without the political problem, because I had the sales and because the car was getting really good, then we would have gotten whatever we needed to do. But then I would be building the car. And then my body doesn't work that way.
Yep.
And by failing, I had to address two things. I had to go bankrupt. That's the scariest thing you can do as an entrepreneur, bankrupt. But it didn't scare me. Nothing happened bad. I mean, I had no more money, but other than that, I started making speeches for $10,000 a shot on what it is to go bankrupt. That wasn't bad. And I got paid a couple times a month, got a place in Lake Tahoe, had a new wife, had a new baby, and 2 days a week I was working. Until I decided, I got told that Fiat was pulling out of the country, and I happened to know Pininfarina and Bertoni. I went over there and got their cars, got Fiat to agree to sell them the engines instead of them selling them the bodies, changed the name, changed the paint job, hired the guy that knew all the problems that they never fixed, sent them over there and they fixed all the problems, set up a dealer network, and I was making a couple million a month. Until I get a call from Sergio, come see me. Malcolm, I love what you're doing. We're selling more cars than we ever. I introduced them to Bertoni. They never knew each other. They lived in the same town. I put them on the sign. I made meetings where they both had to come to each other's place. They loved each other.
Sergio, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Sergio Marchioni, thank you, who was headed up Fiat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, what happened now is he tells me I've got to cancel the production. I said, why would you do that? You're selling more cars than you ever did. He said, I'm telling you, I've never been happier. I just made a deal with Cadillac to do the Cadillac Pininfarina Alante. I'm going to build the bodies here, put on 747 and send them over to Detroit where they're putting. I said, that's the dumbest idea I ever heard.
And it was.
And he said, yeah, but I'm getting paid a lot of money. And I can't cancel. That's against the law. I'm stopping production. Now I'm about to be out of business in 6 months. So I tell my guy, who is a car guy of the world, go around the world, get me the cheapest car that I can change and make federal regulations. And he came back with Yugoslavia. Where in the hell is Yugoslavia? Isn't that a communist country?
We remember the Yugo.
And if you have time, I'll tell you a story about Henry Kissinger, who became my advisor, and Larry Eagleberger, who went on my board of Yugo.
We'll talk. We'll get back to that. Dimitri, let me ask you, what was the most interesting aspect of the story when you researched this book? Like, what was it that blew you away?
That's a great question. The thing that blew me away the most was that this obscure car, it has such a legendary status in the automobile world. Now, most normal people don't know anything about the Bricklin, but if you talk to car people, they just light up because this is such a unique circumstance. What he did was so unusual. It's just like any ordinary guy waking up one day and saying, I really want to build my own sports car. And he actually does it. So for car people and gearheads, it really is a kind of like the pinnacle of something that we all kind of dream about, to build our own. Everybody draws their own cars and designs their own cars. He actually did it. And the reaction I get from people and the connection I have with people who know about the Bricklin and understand the meaning of what was accomplished is probably the neatest thing about it. I mean, there's lots of really interesting facts and events in the book, and it is a kind of really unique story for Canada that is North American wide, but it's just that kind of amazingness of actually conjuring up a car out of your head and saying, we're going to get this into production, and building 3,000 of them.
Well, okay, we've got about a minute before we go to question and answer. So Malcolm, I would like to ask you this. You've certainly got a history behind you, Subaru, the scooters, the Yugo, the Bricklin, your electric bicycles, all of those. What is the number one thing you want people to remember about you as your legacy?
What I do tomorrow.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
And I have to say this, I've had billions of interviews and people writing stories forever and ever and ever. This man has done the most thorough job of any human being I've ever met. He is amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I don't think it's possible to improve on your answer there. So we have about 12, 13 minutes that we can do for Q&A. And my understanding is that someone will be coming around with a microphone. Is that correct? We have someone up here. Right up the front here, this gentleman here.
Thank you. Hello. Well, there are very many interesting Canadian technology stories. So why this one?
Like I said, it's the only car built in North America between the 1940s and 2008 with the Roadster. Happens to be built in New Brunswick. I've written a lot on the automotive industry, and I'd always had the Bricklin as a wonderful example of the dynamics of the North American auto industry. And the more I got into it, I realized, geez, this is just a great story. You got this American entrepreneur who comes to Canada, builds this sexy sports car. It does pretty well initially. It falls apart. It's an amazing example of the utility of failure. And it's also a Canadian story that speaks to a much broader discourse and a much broader context, because a lot of people in the States wouldn't even realize that it was built in Canada, especially at the beginning of time. So it just was, it kind of captured me. And the fact is, the car itself is really cool. It's a cool looking car. There's not a lot of gull wing door cars kicking around. And as an example of Canadian technology, Canadian being built in Canada, it's pretty rare to have something so unusual and exotic here.
Thank you.
Right there.
Thank you. This has been great. My questions, yes, are: how many of your cars remain, and is there a club, and are there original owners still of those cars?
Does anybody want to stand up who is a Bricklin owner? There's probably, out of the 3,000 built, there's probably about 1,500 left. So there's another one there.
So we have 3 in the room?
At least.
Yeah, they're both standing up. That's the white car. That's the orange car. And there is his shoes, which are the cars also.
Bricklin International exists as a club for the celebration of Bricklin. Now what's happened is that relatively recently, there's been a lot of Facebook groups that have popped up, all about Bricklin, right? And they are fantastic. And the reason, okay, you can hear me at the back. No, the reason it's really good is because we're attracting all this new membership, all these younger people that are excited, thrilled, titillated by this car, and they want to know more, and they want to get a car. So now we're seeing growth at the club level as a result of Facebook and social media, which is absolutely fantastic, culminating for the 50th anniversary of the Bricklin in St. John, New Brunswick, this August. And it also marks the same date as the very first one that came off the line while we're out there. I mean, it's like, Steve, like honestly. So, Steve, how many do you think are left on the road? How many do you think are left on the road? I think it's about 1,400 or 1,500. I think it's about 1,500. About 1,500 that are left.
And any original owners? That was the third of my question.
Oh, yeah, there are several.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, several, yes.
Are they in the replicas?
Sorry?
Are they in the replicas of the car?
Replicas? No.
Replicas, no.
No, it's hard to make them. It's the plastic. Yeah. It's the plastic. Question there.
There's a question back there.
I'm probably not going to need a mic. I got a question. Love the car, love the styling, love the idea it's a two-door coupe. Get it. If you really like the car, did you ever consider maybe selling it or letting General Motors or Ford or Chrysler or some other company say, we're going to annex you into our corporation. Your car could live on, but like sort of like a Lexus being built by Toyota type thing. Did you ever consider that?
Not even a slightest.
Okay, I'm out of here.
No. And the reason for it is this is out of their scope of understanding. What they didn't understand about the car is what people get by buying that car. They get communication every day with other human beings who are talking to them admiringly. You know how often that happens? Never. You never talk to a stranger. It doesn't happen. If you own a Bricklin, every day you drive it, you talk to people and they talk to you admiringly, and it's a drug. Park that car and nobody talks to you, and you get OD. You start getting all sorts of bad feelings because you lost that wonderful communication of admiring people. That's what you get with the cars I build.
Question there.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for such a wonderful, insightful discussion. I've never been into the cars, but now I really think that other than the EV, there is a whole market and then the whole concept behind it. The one question which for the last few days I'm just thinking about is on the EV especially. The kind of like the Teslas and the Elon Musk new concept of even just discarding the charging stations stuff. Initially he wanted to do that, now he's not doing that. And since he's the pioneer, he is the one who was setting up the whole infrastructure around making the EV making possible. Now, if he's discarding all those plans, or even scaling it back, from your perspective, what's the future going on? Like in the next 5 years, 10 years, how do you see that EV market? Is it going to grow or not grow? And then what will be the future? Will we see a day there would be an electric car, or it will always be a transition till 2050?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but I'll give you an answer to what I think the question is.
Well, if I could just clarify here,
Please.
that Tesla had the supercharger network, which is the largest in the U.S. and I believe in Canada, and
Yeah.
and all of the other manufacturers are agreeing to put that plug into their car.
Absolutely.
And
Smart.
now he has just basically fired the team that does the supercharger.
Makes no
So
sense to me.
as the gentleman said, where do you see it going in light of that?
I got to tell you, I didn't understand that he did, because it made no sense. That's number one. But I don't want to sell him short. I don't know what's in his mind. He has to have some good idea in there, or he's going nuts. Because, I mean, that is such an important part of what the game is about, and he has it in his hands. I don't understand. Unless he is actually planning on making a change to hydrogen. And that's a possibility, because I guarantee you he's looking at it. And maybe he found something similar to what I found, because it's available. All you have to do is be looking. I sort of question him whether that's true, but you know what? When you think of what that man has done, I mean, with putting things in your brain and collecting rockets when it comes down and putting all these satellites up for the internet and building a car, every single piece of the damn car out there, and I'm not sure what else he might be doing. Holy crap. This is not a man you're going to bet against or even try to figure out why he's doing what he's doing. I still think he should have had dealers. I still think it's going to be the Achilles heel, but man, I can't knock what the hell he's accomplished. He's a miracle. And I wish him success. I think he's good for this country. I think he's good for this world. And he should keep his mouth shut a little bit more.
We have a question over here.
Actually, this is a Tesla question as well. It's been suggested in the automotive press that it would be better for the firm if Musk stepped down as the CEO, and in fact somebody from the auto industry took over.
Yes.
That's the first question. The follow-up is, he said he won't do marketing. How much longer can he get away with not marketing?
Yeah, I think he should step down. I think he should have stepped down like a long time ago. I think he's become a liability in lots of ways for the car part of the company and or car part of his existence. It's great what he's doing with Starlink. It's great what he's doing with SpaceX. That's wonderful. But I think his public relations mistakes have damaged the brand significantly, and it's hurting. It could be hurting him. I wish he would step down. Well, the second part, Jason, was. Yeah, he did do advertising at the beginning, and he pushed the green aspect of it. I put some of these ads up in my classes when I'm talking about marketing stuff like that. He doesn't need to. Ford didn't need to for a long time either. Ford had not a lot of marketing because the car just sold itself. If you're the only successful one in North America, which he has been for a long time, he doesn't need to. The cars advertise themselves. And I don't think he needs to. And you know, on the pullback of the network, the charging network, I mean, he's not a charity. He has been doing this pretty significantly, and it is, you know, he's been able to get everybody to come to his standard, which is what he wanted to achieve. I think he's asking other people to put some skin in the game on the charging network side of things, which makes sense for him.
And that is one thing that the automakers have to deal with now, and you realize this as well, was when you were building your Bricklin and the Yugo and everything else, you didn't have to worry about how people fueled them up because the gas stations looked after that.
Yep.
And now you're in a situation where the automakers, the onus is on the automakers to provide ways of fueling it up. How is that changing the industry?
Of course, they bit off more than they could chew. They ignored what the facts are and they jumped into it. I don't know what pushed them, period. But they went in too fast and now they're, oh my God, what are we going to do? And at the same time, they're trying to get rid of the dealers because they want to copy Musk's way of making money. They like it. And they've never had a good relationship with the dealers because they never treated them correctly anyhow. So now we're going to have and the dealers, of course, have protection from the state because that's where they have power. It's not going to be nice. It's just not going to be nice. I'm going to come into that. I'm going to set up 500 dealers who are going to love me because I'm going to give them what they won't. A real territory where they never get their own car as a competition. That's what they hate, and that's what they get when they do a good job.
Can I just say, like, as a historian, you know, it is important to recognize that after the meltdown in 2008, 2009, when the government bailed out General Motors and Chrysler, you know, one of the things that the Obama administration did, and Biden has done as well through the IRA, is encouraged significantly a shift towards decarbonization. They've provided subsidies, they've provided credits, they've provided all kinds of funding and infrastructure to try to move the automakers into EVs. That's been a real incentive for the car manufacturers themselves, along with market demand and along with this existential crisis that we're facing where we really do need to stop burning all this fossil fuel.
Now, I have one last question. We have time for one last question, and I'm going to put this to Malcolm. We're here in the Rotman School of Management, where students are learning about how to become successful in business. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a budding entrepreneur?
Wow. All I can tell you is my life has been a series of going places I never assumed. None of them I would have picked, and none of them did I think I had the ability to go. But I sort of was forced into it. And the only difference I did is I embraced it. And I have had the happiest life you can imagine. And I would never change a thing that happened to me because of it. How do you teach that to somebody? Of my 6 sons, my last son got it. All right? I mean, they're all doing well, but my last son got it. He understands it, and he's the youngest, and he's the most successful. And I don't even know how to teach it to myself, but I was laughing. I built a car in New Brunswick. When I sold my first business to make my first million, the guy came from New Brunswick, Georgia, and I'm staying in a hotel on Brunswick Drive. Tell me how that happens exactly. Now, to most people, to me it means something. I just don't know what it means. But it certainly means something really important. And I'll file that down the line, and one of these days I'll say, oh, that's what it was. That's all I can tell you. Just when you find yourself in a place, usually it comes when you're confused. When you're confused, that means you're about to have a new thing. Don't keep worrying about being confused. Look for what the new thing is. That's what you should be doing. Because what you should be doing is what makes you happy, not what you think is going to make you happy. It's the next thing. It will come in front of you. How the hell do you teach that to anybody? I got to reinforce myself.
So basically just follow your,
You gotta go with it.
that's what they say, follow your heart. Is that
That's
true?
it. You got it. And how do you teach that? Because when you're there, right before it's there, you're nervous, you're scared, you're everything and concentrating on the bad part when it's the door to the next place. And too many people get stuck there and their life is screwed.
Well, I mean, that is one thing. You got knocked down how many times?
I never got knocked down.
Well, let's say bruised.
I got introduced to a new area, a new thing. And I had to fight through it the way everybody does until finally I decided, screw it. I'm going to look at it as an opportunity. And the only difference is I got rid of a little pain. That's all that happened different because it was going to go that way whether I wanted it or not. And it always was what I wanted. I just didn't know it.
Fabulous. Okay, well, I want to thank both of you so much for being here today and for sharing this information with us, the insights, and especially the experience. And to our audience, we want to thank you for joining us. And of those of you who have purchased a book, Malcolm and Dimitri will be available to sign it for you. They'll be seated at a table here at the front of the stage. And if you didn't get a book and you'd like to buy one, they're for sale at the credenza where you came in. And thank you again to Dimitri, to Malcolm, to our audience, and we hope to see you at future Rotman events.
Then I have to say something. The clock is at 1 second. She did it exactly on time. I've never heard of anything like that.